Welcome to Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. Today we'll be covering Advanced Combat in 4th edition. Okay, so one of the first topics we should cover is ranged combat. Ranged combat has a few caveats. It does not get opposed by melee skills unless they have a large enough shield. So for example, if they have a buckler, if they have only a hand weapon, a short sword, long sword, they can't oppose it with melee skill. Great for going after enemies that are like a sword master, someone that's extremely deadly in close quarters, but they can't oppose you using range skills. So if there's someone that's a brute that's really good at fighting, but they can't dodge, that's when you use your ranged weapons. The second thing you have to consider is that you can't do ranged attacks when you're engaged, when you're fighting with someone, unless you have a pistol. In that case, make sure you keep your distance and make sure you stay. Here's a tip for you: make sure you stay in the optimal range. In the optimal range, it'll give you bonuses to hit. I'll talk about that later. Lastly, you need to consider that your range skill, while engaged with your target can oppose your attack with any melee skill. So if you're within melee combat, you have your pistol out, you're shooting, they're going to be able to oppose you with their melee skill, so don't get too close. Okay, now what did I talk about with that optimal range? What was I talking about? Well, consider this weapon here, a bow. And you'll notice that in the combat tab of your character sheet, and remember, we create a character as a Friendus. If you haven't watched that video already, go back in the video description below and go into that video. I'll walk you through the entire process, but here it is. The range for some of the weapons, there's an optimal range. And you'll notice that from 0 to 5 yards, you have a minus 20. From 6 to 25, you have 0. Bonus, a modifier. So this modifier, this bonus, at each specific range band, you get a bonus or demerit. You can customize what the bonus or demerit or debuff is at each range sector based on customization that you can augment in the configuration settings, and you can set that up in the I believe system settings, a Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4th edition homebrew, and you can go down here and you can disable or enable the ranged bands. In this area, for example, range band modifiers, I have that clicked on. If you didn't have this clicked on, then the shorter distance it is, for example here, I'll just show you. The shorter distance it is, the greater the, see, look, the shorter it is, the easier it is to hit. So that's the default, but you can change it to the range band, which is what I did. You want to stay in the optimal range. So, for example, using default, you would stay within the easy range, within 0 to 5 yards. This puts you in the best situation to hit, but also the most dangerous one. Because if the enemy gets close to you, remember the third rule here, remember the second rule here, you cannot use your bow if they're within melee distance. So you have to balance safety versus reward in this case. Alright, now that's the first topic I wanted to cover. The second topic I want to cover is the two-weapon fighting. Two-weapon fighting, some warriors prefer to fight with weapon in each hand. For example, a duelist with a sword and a sword breaker, or a sword and a shield, or a sword and a main gaunch, which is like a parrying dagger. You can only use one-handed close combat weapons or a pistol when fighting with two weapons. You can't do two great swords. That's impossible. You may use either hand to attack, so you can attack with one but not the other. However, if you attack with your secondary hand, you get a minus 20 penalty. So that means you attack with your offhand, you attack with your non-dominant hand. But if you have the dual wielder trait, and that's the talent that makes this whole thing work, you can attack with both weapons. So if you're going with the two-weapon fighting, if you're trying to dual wield, you have to get the dual wielder talent. Now I'll show you what that talent is right now. Here it is. I'm not going to go over it in detail. It's basically already covered it. Minus 20 if you're fighting with your non-dominant hand. And the ambidextrous talent is also very important to have. It helps when you're attacking with your non-dominant hand, but just consider that the dual wielder trait is a necessity if you're going with this. Everything else is the exact same in combat. Keep in mind that when you're dual wielding, you're pretty weak to archers. So make sure you, here's a tip when fighting against archers, make sure you get close to the enemy. You're straddling them, so your archers, they get a minus 20 debuff shooting into combat. So if you're getting really close to your enemy, if you're engaged, it'll be really hard for them to shoot you. That's a tip for you guys. Alright, Another thing I wanted to cover was unarmed combat. This is when you don't fight with a sword, when you don't fight with any kind of weapon except your hand. There is a specific advantage with this, and that is grappling. Grappling, you can entangle your opponent and you can force them into a strength check. So if you have high strength and you don't have a weapon, this is what you do. You get in, you grapple them, and then you go into this strength contest where you can further entangle your opponent, where you can further just deal damage to them using your strength plus SL, and just keep hitting him, and binding them so they can't do anything. Really good for people that specialize in grappling, but the bad thing is when you're trying to fight against horsemen, when you're trying to fight against mounted figures, these people that are way bigger than you, that have advantages in strength, you're not going to have a good time. Also, when you're fighting against ranged people that stay, skirmishers that stay like, 20, 40 yards away, good luck trying to get close to them. But yeah, I would take a look at this, make sure you have everything down. Nothing too good here. Lastly, we're going to cover mounted combat, one of my favorite and one of the most overpowered elements in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. Riding into combat on a mount. First thing you should consider is that you're using the move of the mount. So that means you're going to be way faster. You're going to also have specific drawbacks, and that is if you have a horse, he's not going to be able to move through really big, really small openings. One of the main merits of this ability is that any melee attack from a rider to a smaller target than the mount gains a plus 20 to hit. A plus 20! My goodness, that is such a huge bonus. You're slashing down at that orc, you're slashing down at that goblin, you're slashing down at whatever, you're going to get plus 20 flat to hit. That's like starting with 2 advantage. Really good. If you're rolling to hit a mounted character, you can choose whether it hits the rider or the mount. So they can choose to kill your mount or kill you. Either way, I think it's a bonus. If they kill your mount, yes, you need to pay more money. You need to get another horse or another war horse or another draft horse, riding horse, whatever mount you're using. But it's like having a shield and you having an extra extended health bar. It's a merit. Unless the horse throws you and you don't have a good riding check. That's a separate thing. We're going to cover that later. Just make sure you can actually ride a horse if you're doing mounted combat. Alright. If you are in close combat, you also suffer a minus 10 to your melee test if you target the rider and are smaller than the mount. Another bonus, right? They're harder to hit you because you're up there on the mount, up there on the horse. So they have a minus 10 debuff. You have a plus 20 buff. You have a plus 30 advantage, essentially. Now, what is the drawback of riding a horse? If you get plus 30 on average, what is the drawback? And that is the skittish trait. Some horses are not meant to be fighting. Just like how some dogs are not meant to be fighting. My golden retriever, he's not going to be fighting anyone. So the skittish trait makes it so that when you get scared by magic, by loud noises, you get plus 3 broken conditions. And broken condition, essentially what that is they run away and with their tail stuck between their legs. And if you're riding that person, then you're running away too. Not good, right? Not good. Now, what is magic or loud noises? Loud noises. Well, that's up to you and the game master to decide. But personally, here are some obvious things. If you get hit, if the horse gets hit in the head, that's a really loud noise. If they get hit by magic, that's a really loud noise. If they get hit by any kind of siege works, that's a really loud noise. Now, it's up to you to decide whether or not parrying a blow, whether or not almost getting hit, or whether or not getting hit on the body, taking any damage, counts as a loud noise. It depends. If you don't count it, then that means that the horses are going to be seriously overpowered. If you do count it, then horses are going to be reserved for the wealthy only. So there's a give and take there, and you have to decide. One thing you should keep in mind is that horses are very, very expensive. And so that kind of balances them out. So if you are having a low eco game, you don't really need to consider it that much. Alright, so that's basically it. Next, we're going to go on to charging. And when you're charging, you can use the strength and size of your mount. When calculating damage, that's extremely important when you're doing that because it adds bonuses to damage. Period, right? So another bonus. Finally, when you're riding, you can't dodge well, so one of the counters to mounts is that because they're so big, they're easy to pepper. They're easy to destroy with range combat with them. With 3 or 4 bowmen, you can just destroy them from a distance, right? Unless they can get close to you, in which case, of course, the mounted guys are going to kill you, kill all your archers. But if you're staying in a distance, if there's some natural barrier, then they're going to get destroyed. They're not going to be able to dodge, they're not going to be able to block hardly, they're just going to get peppered with arrows and they're going to die. And that's all you need to know about them. When you do get hit, when you are scared by magic or loud noises, I personally prefer to force the rider into a ride check. A ride check is a specific skill check made to ride your mount, to control your mount. And that's what I like to do. I like to make it pretty tough. So if they succeed, they are able to control their mount, they're able to control their horse or whatever they're riding, their demigriff. If they're not, then it runs away. And if the mount is hit by some kind of really shocking event, if they're hit by like a fireball, it could throw you off. It could throw the rider off the horse. And so that is another thing I like to throw in a ride check there. So if they succeed, then they're able to safely dismount. If they fail, then they get knocked prone. So there it is. Those are the main advanced combat considerations. You have ranged combat, you have 2-weapon fighting, you have unarmed combat, and you have mounted combat. And that's it. Thank you for joining me on Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, and I hope you have a great day.